Welcome to the Successful Nonprofits Podcast. I'm your host, Dolph Goldenberg. And listeners, we have an interesting and varied conversation today with a serial entrepreneur in literally both sectors, the for-profit sector and the nonprofit sector. And, we've been keeping the podcast simple for, 100 plus episodes at this point. And so we don't pre-record the intro. I have a feeling we're going to be talking about websites some, but I also have a feeling we're going to be talking about a lot of things of interest to you when we talk to Adam Walker. So let me share a little bit with you about Adam. So first of all, I often think of myself as a busy person, and when I was doing some research just to make sure I knew everything that Adam was doing since we had him on the podcast the last time, I think it was like on podcast episode 48, so almost 200 episodes ago. So I was doing some research. We've kept up with each other, but Adam does a lot. He's a tough person to keep up with. So let me share with you a little bit more about him. So I already knew that he built and had sold a marketing agency, and I believe he sold that a couple years ago. I also knew that he had built a nonprofit that's called 48 and 48 that builds websites for nonprofit organizations. And I knew he was the CMO, which is Chief Marketing Officer for TechBridge, which is a national organization but located in Atlanta. So he also is the founder of what I would imagine or think of as tech startups, two tech startups. One is Together Letters, and that's for people who don't want and organizations that don't want all the burden of social media, but still want to be able to connect with people in a social media-like way. And the other is Edgewise, and that's a tech company that will work with a nonprofit or a for-profit, develop not just a podcast, but 20 to I think it's like 80 different media hits or, marketing hits every single month. Now, that alone would be enough, but I'm still not done. Adam hosts, and by the way, I was surprised at this. I knew that he hosted the podcast Tech Talk Y'all, and I subscribe to the podcast and enjoy that podcast. I did not know that he also hosts another podcast, Real Pink, which is Susan G. Komen's podcast. And part of what I love about that is I always say every nonprofit should have a podcast. And well, Adam is helping the Susan G. Komen really live that out. And then the last reason I say he is far, far busier than me is we don't even have houseplants in our home. And Adam shares a home with a spouse and 5 children and one more on the way. So without a doubt, Adam is probably one of the busiest guests we have ever had on. And this might be one of the longest introductions I've done in a long, long, long time. Adam, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, it's great to be here. I'm excited about it.
Same here. And I got to let you in on a secret. The first time you came on the podcast, we were not batch recording. We now batch record. We record one day a month, and we try to record 5 to 7 episodes in a day. You are the last recording of the day. And I'll share with you, this is always the best recording because you get me in like the raw state you're ever going to get. And it's funny because when I listen to them, when they come back from the editor, Adam, I'm always like, why can't I be like that all the time? Why do I have to get worn down before I'm like this? So we're in for a treat because I know that you're someone who also is a very real type of a person. So this is going to be a great conversation.
Oh yeah. End of day, second cup of coffee. I'm ready to go.
So I know among one of the many serial entrepreneurial endeavors you have had is you started a nonprofit, 48 and 48. And I know the origin story of that, but I'd love for you to share it with our listeners.
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah. So to start with, really 48 and 48 got started with a couple of simple ideas. The first is most nonprofits do not have good websites. I think that we're going to talk about that a little bit today, right? And a website is just such a critical component for a nonprofit marketing, any kind of nonprofit marketing campaign or any marketing whatsoever. It is the validation tool for that nonprofit that lets people know that they're for real, that they're serious. So that's the first thing, is recognizing there's a huge need in this market. The second thing was recognizing that nonprofits don't have a lot of money to spend on websites. Like that's just not something. Like, nonprofits want to spend their money on helping people. They don't want to spend their money on building websites. And I get that. And then the third thing is there's a lot of marketing professionals that are out there that really want to give of their time, but they don't necessarily want to be on the hook for a 6-month-long, multiple calls a month kind of project. And so it started up with a buddy of mine, Jeff Hillemeyer. It was really his idea, and he sort of suckered me into co-founding it with him. And so it's all his fault, really. And we were talking, and he calls me up one day and he goes, "Hey, Adam, I got this idea. I want to do a weekend event where we build websites for nonprofits." And I'm running a website design agency. And I was like, "Oh, that's great. Yeah, let's do that for sure." And then he says, "Okay, so how many do you think we can do in one weekend?" And he said, "Do you think we can do 10? I said, "Yeah, no problem. We can do 10. We can get some volunteers." He said, "Can we do 20? "Yeah, sure, of course." And he just kept ticking up and up and up. And he finally gets to 50. And I'm like, "Okay, listen, we can do 50, but you got to stop. Like you can't keep asking. Like we can't keep going." And he said, "Okay, well, let's just back it down to 48 since it's 48 hours, and we'll do 48 websites in 48 hours. That's the marketing, in him." And so I'm like, "Yes, I'll be your first volunteer. This will be great." And he says, "Okay, great. So we're going to meet up here. I'm going to get all the people together doing this, and we're going to meet here at this time. And once you be there," so no problem, I'll be there. And so I showed up, and then Jeff starts the meeting and he introduces me as his co-founder. And that's when I found out I was his co-founder for 48 and 48. And that's what we did. We gathered Atlanta's marketing community together, and we all collaboratively built 48 websites in 48 hours just to prove that it could be done. And then at the end of that event, Jeff and I are patting ourselves on the back. We're thinking, "Oh, this is great. We've done a good job. We've done a good deed. This has been awesome." And all the volunteers were like, "So when are we doing this next year?" And Jeff and I were like, "Oh, yeah, maybe we should do this again." And then we started talking about doing it again and again. We expanded to New York and to Boston and to Miami. To London. All over the world. And then of course, COVID hits, and now we're still doing good, but we're all doing it virtual now. So we've got a hybrid event, I think, coming up in October that's going to be part in person here in Atlanta, but mostly virtual, and it's going to be global. We're going to have teams. I think the last global event was online, and I think we had teams from 20 different time zones at that event. So it's going to be great. We're going to build a whole lot of nonprofit websites for nonprofits. So if you're a nonprofit that needs a website, I don't know if you'll be able to get in on the next event, but you could still go ahead and sign up, go through the coursework, and then get in on a future event and get a free website.
So I got a couple quick questions. Are you all still building 48 websites in 48 hours, or are you doing more than that now?
It varies a bit. So there are some smaller events where we don't have as many teams, and we learned the hard way that overburdening teams of volunteers is a bad idea. So we tried in the early years to always push for 48 no matter what. And that did result in some problems. And so now, we typically have one team to one website, maybe one team to two websites. We never want to go beyond that. And that was the decision of our new executive director, by the way, Seema Parekh. Seema's amazing, wonderful person, great leader. She's brought so many people to the table. And really, she leads the whole thing. I'm like a minor volunteer at this point. And so, but that was a great decision. But then at the global event, I think the last number I've heard is we're going to have over 350 volunteers already signed up for the global event that's coming in October. So I expect we'll be north of 500 volunteers by the time it rolls around. So very likely we'll do many more than 48 websites at that event. So yes, we do more sometimes, and sometimes we do a little bit less.
And I almost never do the URL promo early, but we're still going to do the URL promo because you said, hey, if an organization wants to apply, it should. What's the URL on that?
Yeah, so it's 48in48.org. So that's 48in48.org. And you can just look for the nonprofit application right there on the site.
That's awesome. And we're going to link to that in the show notes as well. So got a really important question for you here. And I think this would be true whether 48 and 48 is doing it or whether a nonprofit is using a consultant or a firm to build a new website for them. Let's say it's a nonprofit and they've got their website, like literally the last time they've done a major overhaul, rework of their website was so long ago that it's in something archaic like Joomla. Right. So
run. That's my first advice.
But my question is not for the consultant should they run. My question is for the organization. Obviously, you've got a really outdated website. If it's in something like that, it's probably 20, maybe 25 years old. At least originally it was, and it's really hard to update, and very few people can update it. What are your recommendations for them as they start to think about? Okay, we need to scrap this website and build something brand new. This is not salvageable.
Yeah, I mean, so as far as easy to implement, or I should say easy to manage systems out there, I still think WordPress is still at the top of the heap. I mean, it is as long as it's been there, it's surprising. And there are new technologies that are coming out that are going to, I think, eventually start to marginalize it at least a little bit. But ultimately, if you're talking about a website where you need to manage the content yourself, so you're not paying somebody else to manage the site, And you need to be able to add features, for example, that aren't very expensive. So like, let's say you need to add a calendar. Like there's a great free plugin for that on WordPress. Whereas with other platforms, there may not be a calendar plugin at all, or you may have to pay more money for it. And so I do find that WordPress is still, it's still the king as far as that goes. It's at the top of the heap, and it'll allow you to really manage it well.
And what else should organizations be thinking about? Like when I think back on those websites from the late 90s and early noughts, like, gosh, those were often really complicated websites with, like drop-down menus that had 12 choices in each one. I know you can picture this, by the way.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So here's what I would say. There's always a temptation in marketing to make things overly complicated and to use insider language. And you've got to fight against all of it. It has to be remarkably simple. And by remarkably simple, I mean, like you should be able to put a middle schooler in front of this website and they should be able to navigate to exactly the page with the information that you asked them to navigate to. And they should be able to read the content on that page and fully understand what's there. And that's the part that I think most nonprofits miss is they try to overcomplicate their language. They try to over impress their users in a sense. And I don't think they do it intentionally. It just gets over engineered. And so like a great example is, you mentioned I'm CMO at TechBridge, and TechBridge is an amazing nonprofit that serves other nonprofits' technology needs. And when I came in, like one of the things I looked at was the website. And honestly, at the website that I inherited, I could not understand fundamentally what TechBridge did. Like I couldn't look anywhere on the website and really get a grasp and wrap my head around what we do as an organization. And so one of the first things I did is like, we've got to rebuild this and dramatically simplify every single page. And if you look on our website now, it's dramatically simplified. And you can go to a What We Do page and it's this nice overview, graphic kind of overview of everything we do. And it breaks it down very clearly. And so I think that's the thing is you've got to make sure that all of your messaging is so clear that a middle schooler can understand it. And that's always step number one.
So I guess we're going to then start to think about the middle school test.
It's not a bad way to think about it, right? Like most people read in most marketing, most books are really written at like an 8th grade level. And so if that's true, we're conditioned to read at an 8th grade level. That's just how we are. That's how we're wired because we're not reading at these college levels that we once read at anymore. And if that's true, and we love to scan, and you can't scan complex academic stuff. You can scan 8th grade level stuff. And so we've got to write at that level to make it scannable, to make it consumable. And honestly, it helps Google scan it and consume it as well. So you're going to improve some of your SEO scores that way too.
All right. So I know most of our listeners know what SEO is, but can we talk about SEO for a quick second?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So search engine optimization, what do you want to know? Or what do you want to talk about?
Well, so I could see a nonprofit saying, all right, I could see why Amazon wants SEO. I could see even why successful nonprofits wants SEO. Why does my nonprofit want SEO?
Man, that's a great question. So first of all, volunteers, right? If you want volunteers to find you, if they're looking for volunteer opportunities, they're probably going to go to Google. They're going to ask there, and they're going to look there. So I think that's important. I think donors, I think it's really important for gaining donors. And most important, it's really for the people that you're serving. So like back to TechBridge as an example, because that's where my brain is at such a large majority of the time right now. Like we need to be competing, we as in TechBridge need to be competing for search engine terms that are important to the nonprofits that we serve. And so we've got to be competing and we've got to be competitive in those areas. And we have to be creating content in order to draw in the right traffic so that we can serve more nonprofits, so that we can do more good in the world. So ultimately the answer to your question is we need to care about search engine optimization because it allows us to connect with the right communities of people and therefore allows us to do more good in our given areas.
I love that. And to ping off of that, I think especially if you are doing any type of fee for service, you are competing with for-profits. But
big time.
The other thing I think about, we're in an unusual media age. And this podcast I think of as a very, 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 very small part of a media landscape. Very like minuscule, like, atomic sized in the landscape. But one of the things I think about is, journalism is not what it used to be. There used to be beat reporters. And, those beat reporters knew everything about whatever their topic area was, city hall or health or whatever it is. And now what happens so often is most media outlets have a few generalists on staff and a lot of contractors. And, and as I think about this, for example, with the podcast, sometimes Lexi and I would be like, we really want to talk about, and then fill in the blank. And neither she nor I know someone, like, for example, websites. I know I'm going to call up Adam Walker. But if we're going to talk about something else, I might not have someone immediately in mind that I'm like, this is the best person for us to talk to. And so what do? I go to Google, or Lexi goes to Google, and we put it in. I'm like, okay, who could we talk to? And so if we're not thinking about search engine optimization, then we also are, the media can't find out about us, because we're going to be on page 4 and they're not making it to page 4.
Yep. That's right. Yeah, it's really, really important. And just thinking about how we're creating content and how that plays into SEO, but then also how that plays into social and every other marketing channel is really important. But again, it all comes back to the website as the hub of all of those things. It's the foundation for all of your other marketing efforts.
One of the other foundations of marketing efforts, and I know you're doing this some with Edgewise, not really some, you're doing this a lot with Edgewise. But I think one of the other foundations of marketing efforts is to figure out how to create content, but also how to repurpose that content in all sorts of different ways. And obviously, I'm going to do a great promo toward the end about Edgewise, but share with us like the importance of repurposing and some ways that real nonprofits do that.
Yeah, I mean, so it's interesting that's why I started Edgewise, really was the concept that you can take a podcast and it can actually drive every piece of marketing content you need from one podcast episode. And so the way that I think about that is pretty straightforward. So if you think about it, right? So most organizations have a podcast, and I'm just using podcast, but we could use blog, or you could insert video, or whatever piece of long form content you want here. But an organization will have a podcast, and typically they'll release it and people will listen to it, and then it goes away. Like that's the whole thing. But what if instead you transcribe it? So you put that transcript on your website. So you're going to get some SEO juice. That's the industry term. I kid you not. It's a stupid term, but nonetheless, that's the term. You can get some SEO juice out of it. But then you could also take that transcript, turn it into a blog post pretty quickly and pretty easily. So then you're getting even more written content out of it for SEO. Then because there's so many varied topics and questions inside of a podcast, you can take that one, say 30-minute episode or even 20-minute episode, turn into easily 5 social posts. So think about like audio clips, think about short video clips, audiograms, or even pull quotes, graphics with pull quotes, graphics with my pretty face on them. Like all of those things, you can, so easily 5 social posts. Then if you're on YouTube and you want to start to hack that search engine, and by the way, YouTube is the second largest search engine. So if you want to rank in another search engine other than Google, YouTube is probably the best place to start. If you want to go to Bing, that's a waste of time. And so you can go to YouTube and you can add in, like you can easily cut up and have 2 to 5 videos out of just this conversation you and I are having, right? So you can take one podcast recording and turn it into 15 pieces of marketing content that are then going to drive all of your marketing efforts for the next, week or 2 weeks or whatever it is. And then you record another piece and you do it all over again. And then the nice thing about it is then you've got all this material that's really not dated. Like it's evergreen. So you've got all these assets that you can actually reshare again and again and again. And I didn't even mention, but you can also, and I love this, and you may already do this, but you can record the podcast. Then you can add in like nice video intros and outros and lower thirds and make it look all fancy. And then you can restream it as a live stream and get the juice from all of the social platforms that love live streaming right now, and they'll promote you. So, I mean, it's just so much content you can create from one thing. It's great.
So first of all, Adam, I don't do that primarily because I'm not that hip and my bandwidth is somewhat narrow. But a couple of thoughts that immediately came to mind. The one thing I'm going to push back on, you said, lots of organizations have a blog or a podcast. And I have to share with you, in fact, this happened today. I needed to go to an organization's website, nonprofit organization's website for something, and I was trying to find somebody's name, and I was like, well, maybe it's in their blog. So I clicked on blog, and really I was trying to find their current executive director's name. I did not see it on LinkedIn, and I forgot who it was, and so I'm like, let me go to their blog, see if it's in their blog. Their most recent blog post was 2019.
Yeah, it's pain. You just got to take down the blog at that point. Like, just be done with it. If you're not going to be active, don't exist at all. It's all or nothing with that stuff.
And I agree with you in part because I look at that and I'm like, okay. And the other thing, this is also, I think, really common with blogs. I scrolled down it a little bit and it started in 2019 and it ended 2019. And that told me a lot about that organization. Someone had a good idea. They did it for 3, 4, 5 months. There wasn't traction and they said, we're not getting trouble. And we all know blogging traction is not a 6-month game.
It's a year's game. Right. Podcast traction too. All of it is a year's game. But when it kicks in big, and that's the payoff.
Right. But so that would be my first pushback. My second, though, is I also think, especially with podcasting, right now, a lot of organizations, that's not true, a few organizations, I've already said most don't have a podcast. I think every organization should have a podcast. A few organizations have a podcast, but they're not doing it well. And so an example I will give is there's an organization that I know, I'm not going to name them, I'm about to say some things about them. An organization that I know decided to do a podcast.
Okay.
And so they were allowing people, and by the way, I made these mistakes as an early podcaster too. So and part of that is because I'm stubborn and stupid because I read that I should not have done this and I did it anyway. I'm like, oh, what do all those other experienced podcasters know? Me, I've never done a podcast. I must know something. So I'm stubborn and stupid. That's essentially what my mom would have said to me. But so I made these mistakes for that reason. But so they would allow people to call in on a cell phone to do their interviews. But then the other thing is they posted their podcast to a hosting service like a Libsyn or a SoundCloud, but they weren't paying the money necessary for it to be distributed on an RSS feed. So then what they would do, Adam, I'm not making this up. So then what they would do is they would send out a link like go to Libsyn or go to SoundCloud and listen to this. And I actually had a conversation with them and I was like, it's $20 a month. If you're putting all of this other energy, staff time, everything else into this, I was like, I'm not, and the interesting thing is it's an organization I would probably listen to their podcast.
Right.
But I'm not going to SoundCloud or Libsyn every week. If it's on my streamer, I'm going to do it. If it's not, forget it.
Well, or use Anchor.fm. It's free. And honestly, it's great. I use it for Tech Talk Y'all. We moved over to it years ago. It's been fantastic. So, Anchor.fm is just, I don't get any kickbacks from that, by the way. But but it's great. I really like it. So there you go.
So Adam, now I feel bad because I've been wasting $20 a month all these years. I actually I'm not familiar with Anchor.fm.
So they just recently got purchased by Spotify. So actually, in fact, interestingly, they just released a feature where you can play full-length Spotify songs in your podcast through Anchor.fm. Now, the caveat is it only plays for listeners that are listening in Spotify because that's where they have the rights. But I think at the end of Tech Talk Y'all, now I'm going to actually start adding a Spotify song at the end just because I can. And then my Spotify listeners can appreciate that and everybody else just won't know the difference.
So you just said something to me, and I'm sorry, listeners. I'm kind of going down a nerd, and I'm not calling you a nerd, Adam. I'm calling myself a nerd.
It's okay. I'm a nerd. It's cool. Yeah.
I'm kind of going down a nerd podcast rabbit hole. You just said something to me, which means that tells me I will never ever move my podcast over to Anchor.fm, and that's that they've been acquired by Spotify, and I subscribe to Spotify. And listeners, you can hear this podcast on Spotify, but they're doing some things around podcasting that frankly make me a little queasy. So I'm like, I'm out. If Spotify's fingers are on that button, I'm out.
I just figure I'll get more features out of it. So I'm all about some good features. So
you probably will. And can I tell you something? In 5 more years, Adam, I'm going to go, I was stubborn and stupid. I should have just embraced the Spotify train. I was stubborn and stupid.
There you go. I love it.
So sorry, that was a long tangent off of, okay, let's repurpose stuff. So I agree with you 100%. It is always such a good idea to get a transcript or take your blog post and splice it into some other ways. But I know we talked some about the podcast and how you can do that, your blog post, because that often feels a lot more static to people. You can't do audio clips, you can't do video clips. So what do you suggest on the blog post to repurpose that?
Oh man. So most blog posts, if they're long enough, right? So if it's like a 200-word blog post, there's only so much repurposing you can do. But any blog post that's long enough and has enough ideas in it, you can pull all kinds of graphics out of it, all kinds of pull quotes. So I would think about it in terms of this. I'd read through the blog post and actually just trained a nonprofit on this, trained their entire marketing department on how to do this specifically, and actually pulled, I think, 4 or 5 blog posts from their website and just walked them through sort of my process and strategy for doing it. And essentially, it's pretty simple. It's read through the blog post with a fresh set of eyes, right? Any quote that stands out, that could stand on its own, that's in any way interesting, write that down or highlight that or whatever. That can easily become a graphic if it's powerful enough. Then look at any lists you have in there. And most blog posts are going to have some kind of list, unordered list or a list. And those easily become graphics as well. You could also think about, you could think about doing like an audio version of it. It wouldn't take that much to read a blog post. So you could think of it that way as well.
So I will tell you, the bonus breaks, which are much, much shorter solo episodes, and we do them periodically, those actually started with me just reading the blog posts. I'm now at the point where I can't read on the podcast anymore. People can tell I'm reading, so I do bullet points. But it's funny when you said that, I thought, oh yeah, that's how I started the bonus breaks.
Yeah, exactly. Even if you're just summarizing a podcast, like that's fine. Like read the podcast first, write down your keynotes, take 3 minutes. I used to do that. Actually, I had my own little podcast and I just haven't had time to deal with it, but I'd write a blog post and then I use that to sort of frame my thinking, right? To really, because when you write, you organize, your thinking gets very organized. So I would write the outline, I'd write the blog post. I would then record a podcast, rehashing the blog post, but not word for word, so that it sounded natural and authentic. And then I think I did a few other things. I did some video from that and some other things as well. So, that's a great way to just have a whole process to produce a whole bunch of stuff.
And if I can just throw one more thing on there, I think I may have actually written a blog post about that. I don't think I've done a bonus break, but I might have. But I have written a blog post about this. So I'm going to throw one more thing on there. To me, the one huge lost opportunity in the nonprofit sector is no one is repurposing their executive director reports. So executive directors will take half a day to write a beautiful report to the board. Here's all the great things that are happening at the organization. That could be blog posts. That could be mini podcasts. Pieces of that could be turned into letters for major donors to say, hey, want to let you know what's going on this month at the organization. There are literally like a dozen ways that a marketing person or even the executive director themselves, if it's a small nonprofit, could repurpose that ED report and make a much bigger splash.
Or impact report or end of the year report or whatever report. Every nonprofit's creating some kind of report, and that can become an insane amount of marketing material if you're thoughtful about it. A month's work easily. So yeah, absolutely should be doing that.
Yeah. Well, Adam, got to make sure that we leave some time for this off the map question because I got a good one for you.
Okay, shoot.
I know that at one point in your life, you were really into woodworking and you built an 8-foot long kitchen table. Now, admittedly, I'm somewhat intrigued by the 8-foot long kitchen table, but I'm much, much more intrigued by a kitchen that needs an 8-foot long kitchen table.
Well, yeah. So the story behind that is actually relatively simple. So number one, as you mentioned earlier, I'm married. I've got 5 kids, and we're in the process of adopting a 6th child from China, but because of COVID-19, we're delayed. So we had moved into this house. And we had this like tiny kitchen, like round kitchen table with 4 chairs. Like that was what we had. And we had a pretty decent sized kitchen, eating area. And we realized like, this is stupid. We can't use this table here. This is ridiculous. And so my wife said, well, why don't you just build a table? And I was like, I'm always up for a challenge, right? Like you can't say that and I'm not going to do it. So now I'm going to do it. And I got a friend involved and we basically measured in there, and it was like we could barely fit an 8-foot long table like in this space. Like you could get around it, but it was a little big for the space, but not too bad. But we needed it, right? We were going to sit, 7 of us there, and plus friends or anything else. So I actually built the table, and then I built a bench for one side so we could like stack in more people. So I actually made like extended family meals pretty nice, like Thanksgiving, because we could really pack them into that table. It was pretty great. So it worked out pretty well. And then of course we moved. And it no longer worked anymore. So I had to find a new home for my 8-foot long kitchen table. But that's a whole other story. So
I've got to ask, new home, like, is it an institution somewhere that and it's a serious question, like who took an 8-foot long table?
Well, no. When I say new home, what I did is I slapped an insane amount of polyurethane on it and I set it on my new deck is what I really did, okay. Which I think probably was a mistake. And it's going to ruin it in the long run, but I think it's going to take a long time to ruin it. And that's okay because it was fun. It was a fun process and it was, it worked out fine.
That's awesome. I shared with you right before we got on that we just moved in a new place. And in our own life, we downsized into an apartment for a couple of years. And so we had to get rid of our dining room table. So when we moved, I knew we had to get a new dining room table. And so I played with the idea of making one. And my husband was like, why don't we just think about buying one? It's like, no, I have these great ideas. Let me tell you all these. And eventually he was like, Dolph, let's just go buy one. And I'll share with you, we got a table that we really love and it's beautiful. And there are times that I think he's just a wiser human being than me. Like there was less like cussing and, messed this up in the garage.
Yeah, well, I will tell you, it took substantially longer to create that kitchen table. And in the finishing part is the problem. And the finishing takes forever. I thought I was never going to finish. So I think that was a good move. And I think in the future, I'll probably be buying my tables, but we'll see.
Well, and part of it is I was looking at something that was probably way above my skill ability. So like in 8th grade industrial arts table, I could absolutely build because I did 8th grade industrial arts. But I was looking at let me see if I can get a slab of a tree shipped down from Maine or the Pacific Northwest. And then I'm going to smooth it out and
there you
make
go.
a beautiful live edge tree. And that's when he was like, Dolph, no, this is just a really bad idea. And you just need to stop.
It was wise to listen, I think. That was a good move.
Yeah, it was. At the time, I was like, I love you and this is what I'm going to do. And I look back and I'm like, oh, it was so much better. I did not spend months building something that I regretted. Well, Adam, thank you so much for joining us. I want to make sure our listeners know how to reach out to you. There are 3 URLs, listeners, I want you to know about. The first is adamjwalker.com. And from there, I think you can actually get a link to Tech Talk Y'all as well if you want to listen to his podcast. Getawordin.com, which is Edgewise's URL. And so,
that's actually getaword.in, just so you know.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
.in is the extension on that one. Getaword.in.
I am so sorry. I did that wrong. So it is getaword.in. I apologize. And so that is the URL for Edgewise, which is one of Adam's companies. And, as we talked about, what they do is they help you put together a podcast and they repurpose the content from that podcast in lots of different ways. And then the last one is togetherletters.com. If you love the connection of Facebook or other social media, but you don't love maybe the public aspect of it, or perhaps you don't love, the fact that your crazy Uncle Charlie or your crazy Aunt Jill always post weird things to your timeline, well, togetherletters.com can help you with that because it'll essentially allow you to set up your own little node on the web where you can invite people to connect. So, Adam, thank you again for coming on.
Oh, thanks, Dolph. This is so much fun, man. I really appreciate what you're doing.
And listeners, thanks so much for being with us today. I really enjoyed this conversation. I was smiling a lot. Adam was smiling a lot. And so I hope as you were listening to it, you were smiling and also going, oh yeah, I should think about asking my friend with a middle schooler to look at our website and then tell me what it is that we do. I know that was one of my big takeaways, and I may actually do that with not only my consulting practices website, but a couple other websites as well. Now, if you enjoyed this episode, there are 2 that I want you to download and listen to. The first is episode 102 with Jesse Lane. And that episode is about the top 3 nonprofit website fails. If you're ready to replace that Joomla website with something maybe a little more modern, WordPressy kind of a website, that would be a good episode for you to listen to as well. And the last one, we talked a good little bit about podcasting today, and episode 134 is Broadcast with Your Own Podcast with Matthew Passy. So make sure you check that one out as well. Listeners, I want to leave you with a couple quick asks. I think this episode is releasing middle to end of September 2021. And at this point, we're pretty much fully booked in terms of our client work for the rest of the year. But if you're thinking about strategic planning or board development or executive transitions or anything like that that might be happening in 2022, now would be a good time to have conversations with us. We are already essentially booking our clients for early 2022. Listeners, that is our show for the week. I hope that you have gained some insight to help your nonprofit thrive in a competitive environment. All right, I've waited enough seconds that I can now tell you the disclaimer. And the lawyers make me say it. I probably would not say it other than the fact that they do. So you already know I'm not an attorney, nor I'm an accountant. And you know why? I didn't go to attorney school, and I didn't go to accounting school. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied on for tax, legal, or accounting advice. If that's what you're looking for, if you or your organization need that type of assistance, please find a licensed, credentialed, qualified person in your area and seek out their expertise. If you're not sure what type of a professional you need, you can reach out to me. I'm happy to help you figure that out. And if you know what you need, but you don't know somebody, you can also reach out to me. If I know someone in your area, I'm happy to make that connection.